Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our reading through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Thomas H. Johnson edition. And we turn now to poem 754. My life had stood a loaded gun. Few lines in any poetry are as compelling as the first line of this poem. And I should point out right away that, guys, as I get ready to make these lectures, I usually am consulting between 15 and 20 scholars. I usually have, on average, about 5 to 10 pages of notes and consultations. Are you ready for this? For this lecture, I have looked, and in my packet here, I have over 50 pages of notes from scholars about this poem, the most of any poem that we have addressed to this point. And in fact, an Emily scholar who is a colleague, when I told her I was going to in fact do this series of lecturing all 1,775 poems of Emily Dickinson contained in the Johnson edition, she said, well, I'll be interested to hear what you have to say about 754, because there is no poem of Emily's that's more compelling and more debated in terms of its interpretation than this poem. I mean, on its outset, I could ask you, in what ways is your life like a 12-gauge shotgun? Only notice, not a 12-gauge shotgun, a loaded 12-gauge shotgun. Now, everything about this poem is going to come down to her phrase, my life. Her physical life? Maybe. Her spiritual emotive life? Possibly. Her poetic life? That might be, in fact, the way that we'll end up reading this poem. Now, the scholars are going to obviously disapprove of the treatment that we will give here. Why? Because we're only going to have to work at the epidermal level. But I at least want to expose you to it. By the way, for your notes already, no clean copy made ever of this poem. Emily did not leave a clean copy of this poem. So there's all kinds of variations which will lead to all kinds of debate, no doubt. Now, of course, in this poem, guys, we've always been told, never assume that the I speaker in the poem is the actual poet. So, for example, we read all kinds of poets, and when they speak from the first person, we don't naturally assume that it's actually Frost, or it's actually Adrian Rich, or it's actually whoever that we're reading. But Emily, we have a tendency to do this, and so we'll read this poem as if the I of the poem is, in fact, Emily herself, whether it's legitimate or not. But it's easy to understand what she's saying. It's hard to understand what she means when she says it. There is, as we said, a huge debate about this. By the way, this poem was published in the London Mercury, number 19, February of 1929, for the first time. By the way, the great scholar Lyndall Gordon, in fact, names his biography of Emily, Lives Like Loaded Guns. And all scholars that have come to Emily's work always have found themselves fascinated by this. Our assumption is that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you worked through our set of introductory comments, as well as the preceding 753 poems. We just finished with 753, My Soul Accused Me. Now, the question of this poem is, how does this dramatic monologue, and that's quite frankly, that's what it is. In this poem, a firearm speaks a loaded gun, right? How does it apply to Emily? That'll be our first question. Judith Farr, the great scholar, has pointed out that possibly Emily is the gun and that the owner is her beloved master, as we commented on the master poems. Helen McNeil and Ruth Miller have both said that the loaded, unfired gun is in fact Emily's poetic potential, and that the master or the owner of God is possibly God, or maybe like someone that's respected, like maybe like Sam Boyles or Thomas Higginson. There's all kinds of other debates. The great scholar Wisher has said it this way. Among the poems of Emily, there is a poem, he's speaking about this one, that contains one of the most astonishing metaphysical images that Emily Dickinson ever conceived, an image equivalent in its unexpectedness and its ingenious elaboration to Donne's famous comparison of two lovers as a pair of compasses in Valediction Forbidding Mourning. And then, of course, he quotes, my life had stood a loaded gun. There is, another scholar, Leiter, who has said it this way. One of Emily's most haunting, enigmatic, and debated poems has come to be viewed, this poem, as the great analytic challenge for Dickinson scholars attempting to prove their mettle. There are any number of interpretations the interested reader can consult, as notable for their scope as for their ingenuity. For example, Sarah Howe will argue her entire book centered around this poem. Robert Weisenberg has this to say: this particularly magnificent, capricious, and demanding poem is the premier example of how Dickinson endlessly expansible poems resist any reduction to a single meaning. Wow. So already, guys, I just want to set you up by saying we are now treading on, as we say from our study of biblical corpus, holy ground, right? That is to say, this is sacred turf for Dickinson scholars, which I hope will make you kind of sit up. Now, I want you to notice the switch in this poem between the celebration to the complaint of the final stanza, which many have seen as a riddle of a kind. There is, for some scholars, a certain kind of relationship, possibly a love relationship, that's going on in this poem. Let's enjoy. My life had stood a loaded gun in corners, till a day the owner passed, identified and carried me away. And now we roam in sovereign woods, and now we hunt the doe, and every time I speak for him, the mountains straight reply. And do I smile such cordial light upon the valley glow? It is as a Vesuvian face had led its pleasures through. And when at night, our good day done, I guard my master's head. It's better than the eider duck's deep pillow to have shared. To foe of his, I'm deadly foe. None stir the second time on whom I lay a yellow eye or an emphatic thumb. Though I than he may longer live, he longer must than I, for I have but the power to kill without the power to die. Now, of course, everything is about the I and the he of the poem. Obviously, the loaded gun is problematic for any number of students who read this, especially, wait, what are we doing? We're killing deer? Like, what is going on here in this poem? Again, everything has to do with what she means by life, guys. However you interpret or understand this poem will be contingent on what you understand she means when she says, my life, notice, had stood a loaded gun. By the way, notice, not gun, but rather loaded. You'll remember in our study of poem 512, it was a bomb. She used the phrase gun in 118 and 277. Notice, my life stood there in a corner, a kind of, maybe we would say ignored, right? Not tended to, not used, if you will. A loaded gun. I think the key word of the whole poem is loaded. In other words, potentiality. Now, we're going to suggest that one way to read this poem, there's going to be several, but one way to read this poem is to talk about the loaded gun as Emily's potential poetic inspirational abilities. Till, notice after the dash, a day, notice capitalized, important, the owner passed. Now, again, who is the owner? I think it's fair to say, if you're going to read this poem as Emily's talking about her own poetic abilities, the owner might be the muse, where the inspiration came from. Identified takes us back to poem 174, and carried me away. Now again, some have seen this as relational, a love relationship of a kind. That is to say, somebody actually came and carried her physically away, maybe even potentially sexually away. There's a lot of different ways readers have read this. Notice the 6 ands, the anaphoria of and now, and every time. Do you see it? Right? Just pay attention to it as we go through it now. And now we roam in sovereign woods. Notice now we're together. Before we worked together, but now the gun and the owner are together. Roam in sovereign woods. I can't read this without thinking of Dante and the Divine Commedia. And at the beginning, when he's lost in the middle of a dark wood of error. And now we hunt the doe. And again, is the doe the poetry? By the way, we're going to go from doe to foe. And every time I speak for him, think about that we called our series Chats with Emily. One of the reasons is this very poem. Speak for him. Notice the mountains straight reply. Are we speaking symbolically here? Are we just saying that the retort of the report of the rifle is echoing off of the mountains? And do I smile? Which is interesting that we're back to the smiling as we commented in 753, just above it. I smiled. Here she says, do I smile such cordial light upon the valley glow? It is as a Vesuvian face. Now, Emily's identification with volcanoes and Vesuvius, she loved the symbolism, the eruption. The mountain looks fine, and then all of a sudden Vesuvius explodes. You'll remember this in our study of 601. We're going to come back to it in 1705 and 1748, so write both of those numbers down. 1705, 1748. We'll come back to our study with both of those. She says, had let its pleasure through. So we go from smiling to pleasure. In other words, the joy for Emily is a joy that is explosive, right? Okay. And now we move to at night. Our good day done. Can we please remind ourselves that Emily would recognize that in the very beginning of the King James Bible, you'll remember that God creates, and then God saw that it was good, and then finally, very good. Our good day done. Notice day capitalized. I guard my master's head. Master here will take us to poem 1028 when we finally get there. You'll remember it from poem 96, 336, and 366. I guard my master's head. 'Tis better than the eider's duck. You'll remember eider from 326. Deep pillow to have shared. Now, what exactly is it? Well, if you read this poem as, she's saying, I gained this poetic inspiration from my master, the muse, however you should think it. To guard the master's head, I think here means to protect the relationship that she maybe feels that she has with the muse. Why? Because it's precious. To foe of his, again from doe to foe, to foe of his, I'm deadly foe. Now again, reading this poem as poetic inspiration starts to maybe become a little problematic unless you want to make the argument that she's talking about people who think that they are inspired by the muse, but they in fact are not, that is to say the foe. None stir the second time. This may be Emily's referencing the people who have already condemned her poetry for any number of reasons, on whom I lay a yellow eye, or an emphatic thumb. It's interesting that she goes to eyes and thumbs, of course, speaking about firearms. And now to the final riddle. The argument I think she's making is that she can't outlive this muse, but it's possible maybe the muse can go. I think a lot of Shelley's defense of poetry is standing behind this study. She says it this way, though I then he may longer live. In other words, I can possibly outlive, of course, if we're talking about the gun, obviously the shooter of the gun can't outlive, the gun can outlive the shooter long after the fact. He longer must than I. Some have focused it on the whole notion of immortality here. For I have but the power to kill without the power to die. Now, some have taken us back to 358. Dying annuls the power to kill. It is an interesting idea. In other words, I think Emily is arguing, this is all that I have, and that's the little bit of life that I have with this loaded gun. That is to say, my poetic inspiration. By the way, we'll come back to this study when we hit 1028, and it'll read like this for us. 1028. She'll say it this way. And again, I think how these poems, how you interpret this poem, I'm going to leave up to you. But this is how she says it. 'Twas my one glory, let it be remembered. I was owned of thee. What an amazing poem, right? That idea that somehow the muse kept her. Now, there's a lot of different renderings of this poem, as we have said. I think that the point that she's making is that the artist recognizes the power of the inspiration and the life that the artist gets to enjoy because of that inspiration. And it kind of can stand idle for a long time. And then all of a sudden, it can explode. Your poetic talent, your ability as an author, or as a creator, or as an artist, to be able to recognize in a moment, oh, I do have some talent. Oh, I do have some ability. And it's been sitting there, kind of idle, kind of waiting. The firearm's loaded, but somebody's got to shoot it for it to be of any violence, any destruction, or any creativity. Notice the juxtaposition of the two. At 2B, well, I mean, guys, think about all of the different games that are getting played here in a poem like this, right? I mean, just to pay attention to a few of them, notice that the metric pattern is that of a common measure. Only the first and last rhyme's perfect. All the others are appropriately dissonant, as one scholar has pointed out, suggesting the troubled state of the lyric. Think of all the examples of alliteration here. Life, loaded, corners carried in stanza 1, we, woods, sovereign, speak, straight, smile, such, and valley, Vesuvian in stanzas 2 and 3, day, ducks, deep, deadly in stanzas 4 and 5, longer, live, longer in stanza 6. Notice the consonants, stood, loaded, passed, identified, carried in stanza 1. Rome, time, hymn, mountains in stanza 2. Smile, cordial, light, valley, glow in stanza 3. Deadly, lay, yellow in stanza 5. Emily, I think, is having all kinds of fun as she is playing. And some have pointed out, you can actually read this poem emphasizing certain words, and it actually starts to sound almost like a certain kind of shooting sound that's coming out of the poem. Emily's having all kinds of fun. Finally, at 3A, well, I think there is all kinds of interesting connections that can be made here. Emily will have made a number of different observations when she played games back and forth with people she was writing to about specifically what it was that she was trying to achieve as she played the game of creating the lines of poetry that would in fact be almost like shots of a bullet, right? And she even commented several times in letter 656. In fact, she even comments on the idea of shooting a gun as being the work that she's doing. I can't help but read this and think of our study of Milton and his challenge to himself to try to perform the great poems, the sonnet, of course, sonnet 7 and 19, as we've been lectures on, and our Dante as well. The whole Dante project is in many ways a loaded gun. I mean, if you'll think about it, all of the great projects that we love to call the great exemplar texts are in some ways products of a loaded gun. Finally, to own a text like this at 3B, how do you read this poem? And to what degree is your life standing there like a loaded gun, waiting to be picked up out of the corner and used? Thank you.